Hello, my name is Pam Brubaker, and I welcome you to the week 1 of an 8-week series of grief care. Grief care is usually offered at Bayside Church 3 times a year, January, April, September. For now, while we're unable to meet face-to-face in person due to the COVID virus, we're going to try doing grief care a little bit differently. I wish that we could be meeting face-to-face. I wish we were getting together for another reason than that someone very important to you has died. Grief care is one way of many ways to help you with your loss and with your grief. Grief care was started from scratch a long time ago when I was young. When I was a new hospice nurse, I had worked prior to that in intensive care, coronary care, the emergency room, pediatrics, and I certainly had experienced loss in those areas. But dealing with the day-to-day intensity of grieving in hospice, end-of-life issues, it became very clear that I did not know how to deal with grief. Well, God knew, because at that time I was attending a church that decided we need a bereavement program for our church and for the community. Oh, look, there's 2 people that work in hospice. We'll ask them to do it. Well, I was the one that needed help. But you know, I was helped. My co-worker and I spent a lot of time researching and reading and coming to an understanding of what was needed, what was important in coming alongside of others who had experienced loss and were grieving. And that all started 34 years ago when I was young. What I want to tell you about is what's going on now with grief care, especially in this online time-conscious way that we need to use, because, you know, when you stare into a screen, you get kind of numb and deaf. And so we don't want this to go on for too long. So we split it into 2 parts. My part, which is this 8 times on YouTube presentation of information that you can access at your convenience about some aspect of grief. That's the teaching part. And then 8 Zoom meetings where you can meet at a specific time with others who you will be sharing with as you're comfortable, who have had a loss that's similar to your loss. There's an experienced facilitator who will be helping with the conversations, and you can share and receive support from each other. Now, what is covered in the 8 weeks? When you guys come together to talk, you can talk about whatever you want. You can make reference to the topics that I will cover, that you will hopefully have looked at before you come together in your Zoom meeting. But often people just need to say, this is what's going on with me today. This is what my needs are, or this is how I'm feeling. And that's just great. That's what people want to do and need to do. But as far as the information that I'll be providing here in this room, the first week, tonight, now, will be an overview of grief. What are realistic expectations of this process, of myself, of others? How do we even find a way to talk about the unspeakable? You know, there aren't words to express grief properly, but we try. And then week 2 is the normal thoughts and feelings and behaviors of grief that people experience, and kind of a relief to hear, because it's not, oh, I'm not losing my mind, because that's often how grief can feel, and that's not what's happening. So we'll talk about that. Week 3, where is God in life and in loss? And the 23rd Psalm speaks beautifully, has much to say about where God is in life and loss. Week 4, grief manifests itself in your body. There's physical manifestations of grief. And so as a nurse, I find that very interesting. And it's good, helpful information about that. And ways that you can take care of yourself and dealing with that. And then week 5, the stages of grief. People like this really, it's one of their favorites because it takes all the pieces of grief, thoughts and feelings and behaviors and the physical aspects and that. It likes it and it puts it on a model. There's 4 of them that gives it shape and dimension and helps you to kind of know, where am I in this process? How do I even conceptualize it? So this is really helpful. And then week 6 is how the grief experience is influenced by how a person is wired. What is your personality type, your disposition? Very much the kind of people we are affects our ability to cope or how we cope with life and loss. And then week 7, 4 tasks of mourning. It's kind of the framework upon which everything hangs in terms of what are we trying to accomplish here, and then all the changes. Looking at the changes that happen to a family and how they communicate and the family dynamics and the social changes maybe one has, especially women lose their husbands or husbands lose their wives and they were a pair and now they're a single, and how does life then be operated? And then sometimes there's financial issues, and then personal things of change and how we cope with that, and what to do with holidays. And then week 8 is really getting at the issue of what is this acceptance thing of grief. You have to accept the loss. And people bow their neck and dig in their heels and say, watch me not do it. Because acceptance sounds like it's okay. It's not okay. It'll never be okay. And so we get at that. What does this acceptance mean? Is it reasonable? Is it even possible? So with all that being said about the background information, I want to also share that I hope that you will commit to watch all of the videos, because there's unique things being talked about in each of these topics and subjects and that. So I hope you'll watch it, and that you'll commit to attend all of the 8 Zoom meetings. People develop relationships with each other, even though it's a dumb screen and we're not able to be in each other's physical presence. People become acquainted, and this is probably the heart of grief care, of a bereavement group, is your time with each other. And so as you develop trust and become acquainted with each other's details of your losses, people want to see each other. So I hope that you will commit to attend all of those 8 Zoom meetings. And they will last no more than an hour. I'm going to try to go no more than 40 minutes, and then enough of me. And then on a different time, you will meet with your Zoom group, and that will be somewhere 45 minutes to an hour. Okay? And you should have received from me, handed to you in person on your doorstep, in the mail, or we meet in a parking lot so that you can have the 150 pages of the grief care folder that is all kinds of topics. And for example, tonight's for session 1, there's the front page of session 1. And if you will have looked through that, or at least you'll know what you've got in terms of what is being talked about. Okay, now with that being said, what will usually happen is I like to open in prayer, and this is a beautiful prayer that actually came from a card from a service for my next door neighbor, and it's just a beautiful prayer. May the Lord support you all the day long, till the shadows lengthen and the evening comes and the busy world is hushed. The fever of life is over, the day's work is done. Then in his mercy, may he grant you a safe lodging, a holy rest and peace. And this is something that we want you to have. There's no getting over grief. There's no end in the sense that, okay, you've done this and this and this, and now you're done. This is learning how to live without the presence of somebody so important to you, and having life be worthwhile. I will get on with these remarks I want to make about this grief process. I will just tell you that it takes a lot of courage for a person to show up for a bereavement series of any kind, because it's fearsome. People think, how can I possibly deal with this? Look at this, because that's what we're asking you to do, is take it out of the shadows into the light and look at it from all sides. And people think, is this going to be making me feel better, or is it going to make me feel worse? And so is it going to set me back? I was doing just fine until I started listening to and dealing with grief, and then the tears came and the feelings were powerful, and how helpful is this really? And so as you persevere, then you will find the benefit becomes increasingly obvious. All right, so I will just say that one of the concerns that people have is, am I okay? Am I okay? And so what we want to do is tell you that at first you may think, I am not okay, I'm dealing with grief. And we are going to help you understand that you're okay, Okay, now, some general comments about grief. First, I will tell you that you will probably hear me say many times, what is the point? Because I tend to kind of go off track with a story or something, and it's like, what's the point here? And you know, I'm doing this in an empty room, and you're not here to say, Pam, you were trying to tell us about this. So this is going to be even more of an adventure than it usually is. Oh, brother. Some general information about grief that I want to tell you. Grief is at one and the same time both an individual and a universal experience. For each person who has a loved one that dies, it's like you are the only one who's ever had a loss. It doesn't matter if there's hundreds and thousands and bazillions. Yours is one of a kind, unique. They say grief is as unique as your own fingerprint. Each person's grief is so one of a kind, because think of it, your history, your relationship, the details, the how you met, what you said to each other, what you experienced, get blah de blah, goes on, one of a kind. Even people in a family that lose somebody, it's still unique, even though they share that person in their family, because each of you had a different relationship to them. However, the one thing that is also true is that everyone who grieves has emotions and thoughts similar to everyone else who grieves, because we're human beings. For example, as a nurse, if I want to take my stethoscope and listen to a person's heart, I don't have to try to find the heart. You know, where is it in this person? It's in the same place as it is in the human body. And so in that sense, then, we have in common emotions. For example, if someone grieving said, this happens in my grief and it makes me so angry, and somebody else would say, gosh, that doesn't bother me, that doesn't make me mad, but I know what mad feels like. And there's the connection. There's how we can share. So we are all sheep. The Bible says we're all sheep. That's not always a big compliment in some respects, but we're all sheep made out of the same sheep stuff. And sheep have similar traits and can understand each other in their sheepdom. So it is hugely helpful to be together with others who grieve, because they get it. And you feel not so alone, and you're not the only one, which does not minimize, trivialize, lessen your grief, because you're one of many. Remember, you're like the only one. The person that grieves the most is you. Each of you could rightly say, no one hurts more than me. It is so personal, and it's so personally overwhelming. Who has the hardest and saddest loss? You do. It's not a contest. We don't come and see who has more of a right to grieve. That's ridiculous. Now, in terms of time, grief takes as long as it takes. And it takes a whole lot longer than people would ever imagine it does. But the goal of grieving is not to hurry it up. It's not to get over it. I always say, if somebody says, "You getting over your grief yet?" Them's fighting words. Then you want to get them around the neck and squeeze them. But anybody that says that doesn't understand, they haven't had a loss, or they just don't want to see you hurting anymore. So what's the deal? What's the point? The goal is not to hurry up with grief, to get over it, get beyond it. The goal is to fully experience it. I mean, go to the depths of it. To deal rightly with grief, it is said you can't go over it, you can't go under it, can't go around it, and running the other way isn't going to do you any favors. No, it is to deal with grief rightly is to go right to the middle of it. Go straight to the pain. Now, this is opposite of what we learn in life from the beginning as little children. Avoid pain whenever possible. Stay away from whatever can hurt you. A little child, one of the first things little children learn is hot, hot. Don't touch the burger on the stove, hot. Get away from the fireplace. Don't get near the electrical outlet and stick your fingers or a fork or something in the electric. Hot, bad. Get away from obnoxious people, bullies. Don't let them hurt you. Get away from anything or anyone who could hurt you. This is what we learn early on in life, and it's pretty sensible. Consequently, it doesn't make sense to people that there is specific benefit in intentionally going straight to the pain of grief in order to get through it. Because there's a thing that says the way out is through. You go in, through, out. And so staring it straight in the eye, I'm a big one for that. Feel the fear and do it anyway. The thing that we are most apprehensive about needs to be taken out of the shadows into the bright light and examined from all sides. And truly, it is not the idea that you get to it to get through it in terms of getting over it. It's a better way of saying it is you stare grief straight in the eye is to how to successfully navigate through it. A good quote, grief is navigating a life interrupted. And that tends to even sound understated, but grief is navigating a life interrupted. No kidding. Though grief needs to be appropriately understood in order to navigate through it. That starts with knowing everything that grief is not. Okay? Grief is not an illness. Grief is not a mental disorder. Grief is not weakness. Grief is not a failure to cope. Grief is not a character issue. Grief is not a failure of faith. Grief is the profound missing of someone greatly loved, now absent. A quote, a single person is missing for you, and the whole world seems empty. Grief is not a short-term condition. It is rather an ongoing, lifelong process. I remember fighting the statement, you never get over it, in the first years of dealing with grief, because it sounded like it was saying, well, you're doomed. That's it. You'll never get over it. It's just that saying it that way, you're getting over it. This is not the right words. It's inappropriate. There's so many more appropriate, correct ways of saying it. So this lifelong process sounds like, oh no, but it changes, it evolves. So this is a good way to say it. Grief is the bridge that we cross over to move from what was to what is now. Grief is the bridge we cross over to move from what was to what is now. So crossing over that bridge takes a long time and a lot of work because grief does not take care of itself. If grief is ignored, avoided, it'll just sit and wait. Time doesn't heal it, time alone. Eventually, grief that's not dealt with will go underground and affect everything. Our perspective, attitude, our choices, relationships, the present, the past, the future, all of life, if we don't deal with it. A woman that I worked with who was a nurse ratchet. She was a really good nurse, but man alive, you want to do whatever she told you to do. Well, she was an excellent nurse, and I got to know her. We worked at night together, and what came out in her life was that when she was 10 years old, her father died, and he was the nurturer in the family. Her mother was rules, and you do it, you just do it. And her father was loving and affectionate, and when he died, he kind of abandoned her, she felt, to her mother. And she decided in her heartache and her grief, and this was back probably in the 30s, okay, this is a long time ago, almost 100 years ago, when people didn't know anything about grief, and children certainly didn't, and they weren't helped at all. But anyway, the point is, she decided, when I have children, I will never let them get close to me like I was close to my dad, so that if something happens to me, they won't hurt like I have all my life. And are you surprised to hear that her children, when they got out of the house as quickly as they could, and she doesn't have much contact with them, because they never understood that she was kind of trying to protect them and trying to enable them not to be hurt by the future losses. And they didn't get that. They just didn't think she cared about them at all. So the point is that if grief goes underground and isn't dealt with, it can affect our relationships with other people. It can cause people to not allow themselves to get close to anybody else because they just don't want to experience that kind of pain again. It can go affect us in ways that we're not even able to identify necessarily easily at all. Now, what's needed then is to understand that grief doesn't take care of itself. Just time going by doesn't take care of it. Now, I will say that in the beginning days, weeks, maybe months of grief, there is this yearning to have the person come back. And at first, when the phone rings, it's them, they're calling. You hear the car drive in the driveway, it's them, they're home. There's this weird feeling that if they're going to walk around the corner and come into the room, and over we experience the sadness of the realization they died, they're not coming back. And so time helps in the sense that eventually we stop having that thought or the expectation that they're going to come back. And that's about the only way time helps too. It's how you use time. Time is actually measured by events, activities. And so the activities are working on grief and getting to know grief and digging in and finding this works, that doesn't work. This helps, that doesn't help. Just getting wise. Because the whole thing about losing somebody is that, especially if you've never, a person doesn't have any experience. We're rubes. We're naive to dealing with it, and we are not skillful. So understanding grief better is to become more skillful. So what's this thing of time? A good little story about it is that you're going to bake a cake. You get out all the ingredients, mix them all together, grease the pan, pour the batter in the pan, put the pan in the oven, and give it some time. But if you didn't turn the oven on, that cake's not going to bake. And so in a sense, the pain of wrestling with grief and grabbing it and holding on to it, and I refuse to let you go until I am blessed by this. It's not going to happen. Okay, so what's needed to deal with grief? Knowing it's exactly what a person often feels after someone has died, so that you're not taken by surprise. Knowing that grief is appropriate, healthy, necessary. Knowing correct information about grief in order to have realistic expectations of the process, of yourself, of others. Understanding how grief works so that you won't come to the wrong conclusions about the many feelings of grief. I always like that. Feel what you feel. Don't let anybody try and talk you out of it. Don't say, somebody say, oh, you shouldn't feel like that. Oh, don't feel like that. Hey, I feel what I feel. And that's important. However, just don't come to the wrong conclusions about how you feel. Like, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Would a correct conclusion be, are you losing your mind? No, I feel like I'll never be loved again. Is this true? I may feel it, but is this really true? So all kinds of things like that. What's needed to deal with grief? What grief care offers, which is a safe place with others who've experienced loss, and where there is comfort, support, information, and hope. Again, the understanding that one doesn't get over it, but one learns to live with it. How do two porcupines get up close and personal? Very carefully. If they don't lay down their quills, they will stab each other. But porcupines, and those of us that really engage with our grief, the quills get laid down. And as porcupines can lay down together safely, we can eventually lay down with our grief because we've learned to abide with it. Okay, that's enough for that. Now, every week in Grief Care, we offer you a couple of verses from the week set of verses. So, in a couple places in all of those handouts you've got, but it's in the first page of each week's handouts, so that here you go. It tells all of our phone numbers and how to get a hold. Oh, that's not it. All of our phone numbers, and hang on. Oh well, just know that the first page of each of the handouts. Criminy. There it is. Each page will. I like the pictures we have on these handouts each week. So this is week 1, and on the back of every week's week 1, there is a list of verses that you can look up. You have to look them up, and maybe God will. I believe God can speak to you. The Bible is called the Living Word. It's not 2,000 or more, thousands of years old and not relevant. It's the living Word, and God will speak to you. So, for example, week 1, 2 verses. First verse is from Psalms chapter 86, or the 86th Psalm, okay? Bend down, O Lord, and hear my prayer. Answer me, for I need your help. And then the second verse from that week is Romans in the New Testament, chapter 8. The Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groans that words cannot express. Oh, it's so beautiful. We can pray those kind of verses back to God. Now, you promised me that you would intercede for me, so I am counting on it. And that's what it's like to have a relationship with God, where you can talk to him about everything, and he speaks to us through his word. I wanted to show you, this is fun. I've got a pile going here. Just a minute. My personal losses are my father. Isn't he handsome? They called him the Silver Fox. And he died when he was 79, and that was like 18 years ago. Oh, he had Alzheimer's, still knew us all, but was childlike and passive. I love my dad. And then my mom, and there she is, hugging my dad because they were joined at the hip. My mom was the hammer. She was a force to contend with. And she died 8 years ago when she was 86. She had developed aplastic anemia. Her bone marrow just couldn't make enough red cells. So I love my mom, but I was afraid of my mom, and we all have stories to tell. But anyway, those are my personal losses. I still have my husband and my 2 children and 4 grandchildren. I have pictures, but I won't show you. Homework for this week would be each of you choose something to do that gives you pleasure. And then maybe you'll report back to your group. What is it that you did this week? And you don't have to spend a lot of money. We had a woman that took that seriously and went out and bought a $25,000 truck. And we don't want you to spend money to do something nice for yourself. Don't tell them, well, I had to. It was part of my homework. Nope. It doesn't have to cost any money. But you have to consciously make a decision to do something. You know how time goes by. It goes by weeks and months and years. And we want you to be mindful of the day and the minutes and the moments in the day. Okay, there you go. Those are the things I think we want you to know. I did not show you this picture, which is really important part of this first week. There it is. It's like the 3rd page in your first week's handouts. And the whole point of it is, I love stick figures. Grief affects all the parts. All the parts. And as you learn this information, as you talk, as you examine yourself, you'll see how no wonder this is such a big deal. It's impacted everything. Well, I'm going to end with prayer. Father God, I thank you for these people. I thank you that they've had the courage to show up. I thank you that you know every detail. It is said all the hairs on our head are numbered. That's how well you know us. A sparrow does not fall to the ground that you do not know. So God, you are the Almighty, and you're also so very intimate and personal, and you love each of us. Help these people to trust you above all, to look for you each day, showing up with love and support and care. Give them the ability to hang on. And we thank you for the good God that you are. And we pray in your name, Jesus. Amen. See you next week.